Ethan never thought his life would split into a before and an after. For him, life had always been simple, structured, predictable, almost painfully ordinary. He worked as a junior architect in a mid-sized firm in Seattle, lived alone in a small but neat apartment, and spent his evenings either working late or staring at unfinished sketches he never had the courage to complete. He was the kind of man people described as reliable, the kind who showed up on time, paid his bills early, and kept his emotions locked so deep inside that even he had trouble understanding them. And then there was Lucas. Lucas was the opposite in every possible way. Confident, sharp-tongued, and effortlessly charming. He had a presence that made people turn their heads when he walked into a room. He was a client at first, someone Ethan had to meet for a project discussion, just another name on a file. But their first meeting didn't go as planned. Ethan still remembered that day vividly. He had been nervous, fumbling with his notes, trying to present a design concept he wasn't fully confident in. Lucas had leaned back in his chair, watching him, not judging, but observing in a way that made Ethan feel exposed. "You don't believe in your own work, do you?" Lucas had said casually. The words hit harder than Ethan expected. "I do," Ethan had replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Lucas had smirked slightly. "Then say it like you mean it." That was the first crack. From that day on, their interactions changed. Meetings became longer. Conversations shifted from work to life. Lucas had a way of pulling things out of Ethan. Thoughts, feelings, even frustrations he didn't know he had. For the first time in years, Ethan felt seen. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something quieter, something uncertain. A connection that neither of them fully understood. And then came the night that changed everything. It wasn't planned. There was no dramatic confession, no grand romantic moment. Just a late evening after a long day, both of them exhausted, sitting in Ethan's apartment surrounded by scattered blueprints and empty coffee cups. They talked about regrets, about choices, about loneliness. Lucas had been unusually quiet that night, his usual confidence replaced with something more fragile. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" he had asked. Ethan had looked at him, surprised. "All the time." That was the moment something shifted. The silence between them grew heavier, but not uncomfortable, just full. And then, without thinking too much about it, Lucas reached out. Ethan didn't pull away. What happened next wasn't something Ethan could easily explain, not even to himself. It wasn't about desire alone. It was about vulnerability, about two people who had spent so long hiding their emotions that when they finally let them surface, they didn't know how to stop. That night, they crossed a line neither of them had expected. And by morning, everything felt different. Ethan woke up first. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. For a moment, he didn't remember what had happened, but then he felt the weight beside him, the quiet presence of another person. Lucas. Reality hit all at once. Ethan sat up slowly, his heart racing. His mind was filled with questions, doubts, and a strange sense of fear. What did this mean? What were they now? He glanced at Lucas, who was still asleep, his expression calm, almost peaceful. For a second, Ethan considered waking him up, talking things through, try and make sense of everything. But he didn't. Instead, he got out of bed quietly, got dressed, and left the apartment. That was his biggest mistake. Because avoidance doesn't erase reality. It only delays it. The days that followed were tense. Lucas tried to reach out. Calls, messages, simple things like, "Can we talk?" or "You don't have to disappear." But Ethan didn't respond. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. He wasn't ready to face what had happened. He wasn't ready to confront his feelings, or the possibility that his life was no longer as simple as he had believed. So he buried himself in work. Days turned into weeks, and eventually, Lucas stopped trying. Ethan told himself it was for the best, that whatever they had shared was just a moment, a mistake that didn't need to define their lives. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true, because no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forget that night. And then, everything changed again. It started with something small, a strange fatigue that wouldn't go away. Ethan had always been hardworking, but this was different. He felt exhausted even after a full night's sleep. His body felt heavier, his concentration slipping. At first, he ignored it. Stress, he told himself. Too much work. But then came the nausea. It hit him unexpectedly one morning, forcing him to rush to the bathroom. He stood there afterward, staring at his reflection, trying to make sense of what was happening. Something wasn't right. Days passed, and the symptoms didn't go away. If anything, they got worse. Finally, after weeks of denial, Ethan did something he rarely allowed himself to do. He asked for help. The clinic was quiet, almost too quiet. Ethan sat in the waiting room, his hands clasped tightly together, his mind racing with possibilities he didn't want to consider, when his name was called. He stood up slowly, following the nurse into a small examination room. The doctor was calm, professional. "Tell me what you've been experiencing," she said. Ethan hesitated. How was he supposed to explain this? "I've been feeling off," he said finally. "Tired, nauseous. I don't know what's wrong." The doctor nodded, making notes. "We'll run some tests," she said, "just to be sure." Ethan agreed, though a strange sense of dread settled in his chest. He didn't know why, but something told him his life was about to change again. The results came faster than he expected, and when the doctor walked back into the room, her expression was different, more serious, more careful. "Ethan," she began, "I need you to stay calm." His heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" There was a pause, and then she said the words that would shatter everything he thought he knew about himself. "You're pregnant." The room went silent. Ethan blinked, certain he had misheard. "That's not possible," he said immediately. "There's no way." The doctor didn't argue. Instead, she explained about rare biological conditions, about medical anomalies, about things that weren't supposed to happen, but sometimes did. Ethan listened, but none of it felt real. Pregnant? Him? It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. His mind went back to that night, to Lucas, and suddenly, the truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a random situation. This was real, and it was happening to him. Ethan left the clinic in a daze. The world around him felt distant, like he was watching everything from far away. People walked past him. Cars moved. Life continued as if nothing had changed. But for him, everything had changed. He reached his apartment and sat down, staring at the wall for what felt like hours. His thoughts were a mess. Fear, confusion, anger, and beneath it all, something else. Something he didn't want to acknowledge. Because if this was true, if he really was going to have a child, then there was only one person who needed to know. Lucas. Ethan picked up his phone, his hands trembling. It had been months since they last spoke. Months since he had ignored every message, every attempt to reach out. And now he had no choice. He stared at Lucas's contact name for a long time. Then finally he pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. For a moment, Ethan thought Lucas wouldn't answer. But then, hello, Lucas's voice. Familiar, steady, but distant. Ethan's throat tightened. We need to talk." There was a pause, a long one, and then Lucas replied quietly, "I was wondering how long it would take you." Ethan closed his eyes, knowing that this conversation would change everything, but he had no idea just how much. And this time, running away wasn't an option anymore. Ethan didn't sleep that night. After the call, his phone lay on the table, silent again, but the weight of what it had just done pressed heavily on his chest. Lucas hadn't said much, just one thing before hanging up. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., same place, the same place. That small cafe near the office where they used to meet after work. Ethan kept replaying Lucas's voice in his mind. It wasn't angry. It wasn't warm either. It was controlled, distant in a way that made Ethan uneasy. Morning came too quickly. Ethan stood in front of the mirror, staring at himself. Nothing looked different. Same face, same tired eyes. But inside, everything had shifted. His hand moved unconsciously to his stomach. It still didn't feel real. A part of him kept expecting to wake up and realize this was all some kind of nightmare. But the memory of the doctor's words echoed too clearly. "You're pregnant." He forced himself to look away, grabbed his jacket, and left. The cafe hadn't changed. Same soft music. Same smell of coffee. Same corner table where Lucas always sat. And he was already there. Lucas looked up the moment Ethan stepped inside. For a second, neither of them moved. 3 months of silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. Ethan walked over slowly. "Hi," he said, his voice barely steady. Lucas studied him for a moment before replying, "You look worse than before." It wasn't an insult, just an observation. Ethan gave a small, tired smile. "I haven't been sleeping much." Lucas nodded slightly, gesturing to the chair. "Sit." Ethan sat down. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Lucas leaned forward, his expression serious. "You said we needed to talk." Ethan's fingers tightened around each other. This was it. No more running. "I went to a doctor," he began. Lucas didn't react, but his gaze sharpened. "I've been feeling sick, tired, things didn't make sense." Still nothing from Lucas. Ethan swallowed hard. "And then they told me something I didn't think was possible." A pause. Lucas's voice came quieter this time. "Ethan, just say it." Ethan looked up at him, his eyes filled with something between fear and disbelief. "I'm pregnant." Silence. The world outside the cafe seemed to fade away. Lucas didn't move, didn't blink. For a moment, Ethan thought he hadn't heard him. But then Lucas leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable. "That's not funny. I'm not joking." Lucas let out a sharp breath, running a hand through his hair. "Ethan, think about what you're saying." "I have," Ethan replied, his voice shaking, over and over again. "I didn't believe it either. But it's real." Lucas stared at him, searching for any sign of doubt. "There has to be some mistake." "There isn't." The certainty in Ethan's voice made something shift in Lucas's expression. Confusion turned into something deeper, something heavier. "How?" Lucas asked finally. Ethan gave a hollow laugh. "I wish I knew how to explain it in a way that makes sense." He repeated what the doctor had told him, about rare conditions, about things that shouldn't happen but sometimes did. Lucas listened, but his jaw tightened with every word. When Ethan finished, the silence returned. This time it felt different, more real. Lucas looked down at the table, his fingers tapping lightly against the surface. "And you're sure it's mine?" The question hurt more than Ethan expected, but he understood. "Yes," he said quietly. "There's no one else." Lucas nodded slowly. Another long silence. Finally, he spoke again, his voice lower now. "How far along?" "Almost 3 months." Lucas's head snapped up. 3 months. Ethan flinched slightly. "I didn't know," he said quickly. "I didn't understand what was happening until recently." Lucas stood up suddenly, pacing a few steps away before stopping. 3 months. 3 months of silence. 3 months of not knowing. He turned back to Ethan, something raw in his eyes. "You didn't think to tell me earlier?" Ethan's chest tightened. "I didn't even know how to tell myself." "That's not an excuse." "I know," Ethan admitted, "but I was scared." Lucas let out a bitter laugh. "And ignoring me made it better?" Ethan didn't have an answer for that, because it hadn't. It had only made things worse. "I'm not here to argue," Ethan said after a moment. I didn't think it was right to keep this from you." Lucas stared at him for a long time. Then, slowly, the anger in his expression faded, replaced by something else. Responsibility. "What are you going to do?" he asked. The question hung heavy between them. Ethan had asked himself that same question countless times. "I don't know," he admitted. Lucas frowned. "You don't know?" "I didn't plan for this," Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly. "My life, it wasn't supposed to go like this." "Life doesn't care about plans," Lucas replied quietly. Ethan looked down. "I'm not ready to be a parent," he whispered. Lucas didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was calmer. "No one ever is." Ethan let out a shaky breath. "I'm scared," he admitted. Lucas watched him carefully. For the first time since they had met that day, something softened in his expression. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." That honesty changed something. The tension between them eased just a little. Lucas sat back down. "We'll figure it out," he said after a moment. Ethan looked up, surprised. "We." Lucas met his gaze. "You think I'm going to walk away from this?" Ethan hesitated. I don't know what you'll do, he said honestly. I didn't even know if you'd answer my call. Lucas exhaled slowly. I was angry, he admitted, when you disappeared. I know. But this... Lucas gestured between them. This isn't something I can ignore. Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not relief. Not completely. But something close to it. What does that mean? He asked carefully. Lucas leaned back in his chair, thinking. It means we take this one step at a time, he said. Doctor visits, understanding what's happening. And then, he paused. We decide what kind of future we want. Ethan nodded slowly. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. Weeks passed. Things didn't magically become easy. If anything, they became more complicated. Doctor appointments confirmed everything. The pregnancy was progressing normally, at least medically. Emotionally, it was a different story. Ethan struggled. His body was changing in ways he didn't fully understand. His energy dropped. His moods shifted unpredictably. Some days he felt numb. Other days, overwhelmed. Lucas stayed. Not perfectly. Not without frustration. But he stayed. He started showing up to appointments. Checking in. Making sure Ethan ate. Even when he didn't feel like it. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something real. Something growing. Just like the life Ethan carried. One evening, as they sat in Ethan's apartment, the silence between them felt different again. Less heavy. More familiar. Lucas glanced at him. Have you thought about names? Ethan blinked. Names? For the baby. Ethan hesitated. I haven't even fully accepted this yet, he admitted. Lucas nodded. Fair enough. A pause. Then quietly, Ethan said, Do you ever regret it? Lucas looked at him. That night. Lucas didn't answer immediately. Then he shook his head. No. Ethan frowned slightly. Even now. Even now, Lucas replied. Ethan looked away, processing that, because despite everything, he didn't regret it either. And that scared him almost as much as everything else. Months passed. The reality became impossible to ignore. And then one day, during a routine checkup, everything changed again. The doctor's expression shifted. Concern, silence, and then there might be complications. Ethan's heart dropped. Lucas straightened beside him. What kind of complications? He asked, his voice steady but tense. The doctor hesitated before answering. And whatever she was about to say, it was going to change everything once again. The word complications echoed in Ethan's mind long after the doctor said it. It didn't feel real at first, just like everything else hadn't. But this time, the fear was sharper, more immediate. Ethan sat still, his hands resting on his lap, while Lucas leaned forward. What kind of complications? Lucas asked again, his voice firm now. The doctor took a slow breath. The baby is developing, but Ethan's body is under a lot of strain. This kind of pregnancy is extremely rare. We need to monitor him very closely. Ethan swallowed. Is the baby okay? For now, yes, the doctor replied. But there are risks. Preterm birth, internal stress, and she paused carefully. Serious health consequences for you, Ethan, if things become unstable. The room fell silent. Lucas's jaw tightened. What do we need to do? Regular monitoring, strict rest, and no stress, the doctor said gently. If anything feels wrong, you come in immediately. Ethan nodded slowly, but his mind was already spiraling. Health consequences. That phrase wouldn't leave him. The ride back home was quiet. Ethan stared out the window, watching the world pass by like it had nothing to do with him. Lucas drove without speaking, his grip on the steering wheel just a little tighter than usual. Finally, Ethan spoke. If something happens... Lucas interrupted immediately. Nothing is going to happen. You don't know that. I know we're not giving up before anything even starts. Lucas shot back. Ethan turned to him, his eyes tired. I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. Lucas pulled the car over suddenly. The abrupt stop made Ethan flinch. Lucas turned to him, his expression intense. Then be realistic about this too, he said. You're not alone in this. Ethan's throat tightened. I know that. No, you don't. Lucas replied. Because if you did, you wouldn't keep talking like you have to carry everything by yourself. The words hit deep. Ethan looked away, his vision blurring slightly. I've always handled things on my own, he said quietly. Lucas's voice softened just a little. Yeah, and look where that got you. Ethan let out a weak, almost broken laugh. Fair point. That moment changed something again. Not dramatically, but enough. From that day on, Lucas became more than just someone involved. He became present, really present. He started staying over more often. Cooking meals Ethan didn't feel like making. Sitting beside him during long, quiet evenings where words weren't necessary. And slowly, without either of them saying it out loud, they stopped being just two people dealing with a situation. They started becoming something closer. Something that felt like a family. Unfinished, uncertain, but real. Months passed. Ethan's body grew weaker, but his resolve didn't. There were difficult nights. Pain. Fear. Moments where he questioned everything. But there were also moments he never expected. Like the first time he felt the baby move. He had frozen, his hand instinctively pressing against his stomach. Lucas, he had whispered. Lucas rushed over, concern turning into confusion. What happened? Ethan grabbed his hand, placing it gently where he felt it. And then, a small movement. Lucas's eyes widened. That was... The baby, Ethan said softly. For the first time, Lucas didn't have a response. He just stared, something unreadable but deeply emotional in his eyes. From that moment, everything became more real. Not just the fear, but the connection, the responsibility, the love that neither of them had planned for. And then the day came. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't calm. It was chaos. Ethan woke up in the middle of the night, a sharp pain tearing through his body. He gasped, clutching the sheets. Lucas. Lucas was awake instantly. What's wrong? I think something's wrong, Ethan said, his voice shaking. Lucas didn't waste a second. Within minutes, they were on their way to the hospital. The ride felt endless. Ethan's breathing grew uneven, his grip on Lucas's hand tightening with every passing second. Stay with me, Lucas kept saying. You're okay. Just stay with me. Ethan nodded weakly, but inside, he was terrified. At the hospital, everything moved fast. Doctors, nurses, bright lights, voices overlapping. Lucas was pushed aside as they rushed Ethan into the emergency room. And just like that, he was alone. The waiting room felt colder than it should have. Lucas paced back and forth, his mind racing with every possible outcome. Time passed. Minutes. Hours. He didn't know. Every second felt the same. Until finally, a doctor walked out. Lucas froze. How is he? He asked immediately. The doctor looked at him, her expression serious, but not hopeless. He's stable, she said, but it was close. Lucas felt his knees almost give out. And the baby? A pause. Then, the baby is alive. Lucas closed his eyes, a breath escaping him that he didn't realize he had been holding. You can see them, the doctor added. Lucas didn't wait. When he stepped into the room, everything felt quiet again. Ethan lay on the bed, pale but conscious, and beside him, a tiny, fragile life. Lucas stepped closer slowly, his eyes fixed on the child. He's so small, he whispered. Ethan turned his head slightly, a weak smile on his lips. Yeah. Lucas looked at him, his voice softer than ever before. You did it. Ethan's eyes glistened. We did it. Lucas hesitated for a moment before reaching out, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. And then he froze, because something about the child felt familiar, the shape of his eyes, the curve of his face. Lucas looked back at Ethan, his voice barely above a whisper. Why does he look like me? Ethan let out a quiet, tired laugh. Because he is yours. Lucas didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, staring at the child, at his son, his reality. And in that moment, something inside him shifted completely. Not fear, not doubt, but acceptance. Love. Real, undeniable love. Days passed. Recovery wasn't easy. But Ethan got stronger. Slowly. Lucas stayed by his side the entire time. No hesitation. No distance. Just there, one evening, as they sat together in the quiet hospital room, the baby sleeping peacefully between them, Ethan spoke. I was scared you'd leave, he admitted. Lucas glanced at him. I was scared too, he said. But not of this. Ethan frowned slightly. Then what? Lucas looked at him, his expression honest. Of losing you. Ethan's breath caught. Silence filled the space between them. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was warm. Lucas reached for Ethan's hand, holding it gently. We didn't plan this, he said. Any of it. Ethan nodded. But I don't regret it, Lucas continued. Ethan smiled faintly. Me neither. Lucas looked at him. Really looked this time. Not as someone he once knew. Not as someone connected by circumstance. But as someone who had become irreplaceable. We'll figure the rest out, Lucas said. Ethan squeezed his hand lightly. Together? Lucas nodded. Together? And for the first time since everything began, Ethan truly believed it, because their story hadn't started the way most did. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't planned. But it was real, and sometimes that was more than enough.